Welcome back. For those of you who caught last week's episode with Ellen McCullough, we are in the amateur process of rebranding from Cooking with Bryson. So now we're just going to call it Unicorn Chef. So I'm always joined each week with a fellow unicorn chef. This week is Amelie Koran. And the charity that we're going to highlight is the Washington Area Bicyclists Association. So please donate. As always, we love to see your pictures at home while you cook along with us. So just hashtag unicorn chef and share what you're doing with us. Logistics, for those of you who are joining us live, throw your questions down in the chat window and we will get to them while we are cooking the awesome meal. Amelie, welcome. And first question, of course, what are you drinking tonight?
Well, because we're being professional chefs, I have Lost Rhino's My Imaginary Girlfriend, but it's nearly empty. So I'm then switching to, what is it? Clown Shoes, double dry hopped Zen Garden, New England India Pale Ale.
That is a mouthful. So I am not familiar with Clown Shoes, but I do know Lost Rhino. That is a local brewery that is based out in the western part of Northern Virginia. I am quite pedestrian tonight. I am just drinking a Land Shark.
Cool.
That's it. Cool. Cheers. All right, chef, what are we doing?
All right. So tonight we're doing, I got to switch audio because this is getting to my head here. All right, this isn't better. Am I getting feedback? Cool. Oh, no. Let's switch back to this. I'll just deal with the echo in my ear. Okay, anyhow. So we're making one of my favorite dishes that is particularly near and dear to my heart because it's my barometer for when I go to Thai restaurants. It's Thai basil beef. I forget what the Thai title or whatever is for it. But generally it's one of those meals that I like to make as comfort food. All right. Yeah, the audio here is a little messed up here.
On our side, you're coming through loud and clear.
Yeah, I'm just getting a nasty echo. Like so much so that I can't actually hear you.
Well, that is our space for you, is we're always in an echo chamber.
Yeah.
So,
all right, is this better?
Sorry, you good? Sorry. You good?
Yeah,
no,
it's a little bit better.
You're giving us an echo. All right, well, while you're figuring that out, just on the echo chamber joke, I was hanging out with a few folks tonight on a virtual happy hour, and one of them is a sysadmin. And I was explaining, I was like, you know what, actually the majority of the world, like he's the only IT person at his company. It's just like, you know, most of the stuff you hear on Twitter and most of the talks at conferences and most of the things we're doing is actually only really accessible to a small percentage of folks in this field. Most people are the, you know, the one or two sysadmins who are there servicing all of their organization, and most of the stuff that we talk about is completely irrelevant to them. That's most organizations. We only think of big organizations.
I grew up in that, yeah.
Yeah, just the echo chamber joke. I just happened to have a long conversation with a beleaguered sysadmin tonight.
Yeah, so anyhow, going back to about the Thai beef and basil, this is one of those meals that I find is a comfort food. I gave the recipe for one setting, but generally it's one of those ones where I usually double or triple the recipe. For that, I probably cut more jalapeños and ginger and garlic than anyone would reasonably want. But it requires usually about 2 dishes, especially the volume that I make it in. And generally, like we did before, we prep some of this stuff ahead of time because otherwise you would spend your entire evening like browning beef. But generally, this is one of those meals that I do every so often just because it takes a lot of time, but it's better the second day. So it's one of those ones where you let it sit in its juices and have at it.
All right. So, very cool. What are we doing?
So the first thing you would want to do is necessarily prep the beef. So I left some stuff that was actually uncooked to actually go and put in the to actually start to stir fry. That is usually a, oh gosh, I have to look at the trash can actually. Not the fajita meat, but the other stuff. But you cut that thin so you can actually stir fry it. It may bleed a little bit because it's that area of the meat that tends to have like some blood vessels and stuff in it. So if you're a little squeezy, just queasy, just be prepared for that. Then you have your jalapeños. You can use Thai bird peppers if you want something a little bit spicier, but I live in a household that too much spice would potentially be too much. Then you have your chopped garlic. You can never have too much garlic. So if you are a garlic fiend or not a vampire, traditionally you can use as much garlic as you want. It's usually a 1-to-1 ratio between all these ingredients. One of the other ones I like to do, this is my secret ingredient, so I'm actually giving to you guys my free secret ingredient. Because we use Thai basil, which I've also prepped and dried and somewhat dried since it's now on the floor. That has a ginger flavor to it, and I usually like to kick that up a little bit, so I actually get some ginger and chop it. So that's more or less to taste. You want a good oyster sauce? You can shave the garlic like that as well. Also can be used in drinks afterwards. A good oyster sauce, but unless you read Chinese, oh hey, good catch. Unless you read Taiwanese or Chinese or any of the other languages it comes in, I have no idea if it's any good. Get a light soy sauce. That'll do. That's usually a little salty, so I try to, the light soy sauce is a little bit less salty and a little bit better quality. And my stuff is starting to smoke. Then a good fish sauce. I ended up getting the most expensive fish sauce because I wanted to see if it was any good. That one works really well. I found out yesterday that it does expire. So oyster sauce tends to be this stuff you just keep around the house. If you don't use it often enough, it will expire. So make sure you toss it.
Well,
and
the bottle is going to get, so you're actually going to find it to be a like even more earthy, fermented, like that kind of fishy smell as it sits.
Right. And the last major ingredient, short of rice, is your chili garlic sauce. I think Hoi Fong is the same folks who make your sriracha sauce, which is this bottle.
Yeah, I'm going a little different. I was thinking about sriracha, but I actually have some gochujang that I wanted to throw in there. So I'm bringing a little bit of Korean spicy chili.
Cool. So, provided you've gone through the effort of chopping stuff up, you'll have your pound or so of beef. You would normally heat up some peanut oil or high smoke point oil. I like peanut oil, but some people are allergic.
I'm using Stephanie oil.
Okay, that'll work. They'll give it a nice earthy flavor as well. Trying to keep my kitchen from catching on fire because I've already cooked some stuff in there. But normally I would put in about 2 tablespoons of that. As you cook, the moisture from the beef tends to kind of get in the oil, so you may have to tip in a little bit of extra oil for that. But let's cook the last bit of the beef.
I'm using chicken, so you can actually substitute different proteins in.
Exactly.
Fish, shrimp, chicken, pork, and of course, as Amelie is doing this, beef is the go-to comfort food.
And also make lots of noise. So it's one of those cases where it's good to cook ahead of time if you're doing a thing like this. So traditionally you want to do that for about, well, if you so here's the secret, and I'm now getting lots of sparkly oil here. The secret to cutting the beef thin is freezing it for a little bit ahead of time so it's stiff. and you can cut it thin a lot easier if it's a little bit stiffer. I tend to use a Santoku knife, which is pretty good for cutting this type of beef.
Yeah, Santoku is my favorite go-to.
Unfortunately, my real expensive Santoku died a couple of years ago, where the tip broke off of it, and it just becomes difficult to use after a while.
Oh, I forgot to tell you, you have a fellow employee at Splunk who is judging your dish tonight.
Oh, that's cool.
He's Thai.
I've been told that mine tends to be too salty.
So Mick Baccio, who was the first CISO of the presidential campaign, got really perked up at hearing that you were making this.
I can't say I'm actually ethnically tied to the meal, but I enjoy it. So while that's cooking, go and make the sauce. So again, I'm doing a 3X thing. So let me go look up the menu now. So 2 teaspoons if you want a thin sauce. Then I would do tablespoons if you want more.
So what got you into cooking to begin with?
A necessity. But my mom and my dad, I always had a fresh cooked meal. And my grandmother, always kind of one of those folks that cook for me all the time. We're German, Polish, Russian, so it's just natural. I would make pierogies, but that would take all day.
I'm the same. When I found myself as a second lieutenant at my first post, I realized I didn't know how to cook. And I'm like, well, I need to figure this out.
I like it because it's relaxing. It's one of those cases that, especially during the pandemic, I spent all day in front of the computer doing conferences and stuff like that. And this is just a nice little break after the day. And you probably hear some chirping from my young kitten. Well, not young, she's about a year old now.
What's a year old?
I have 2 kittens, and one of them is a beast when it comes to food. So she smells the beef cooking. I actually heard the pop of the bottle. Prove that it's fresh.
Have you been to Thailand?
No, I have not. I've not been to Asia at all. If anyone was counting, I may have put an extra thing of soy sauce in, but you know, sue me.
Well, for those of you who watched the show, and I know that our current audience has watched many shows, we don't measure. We just sort of all kind of eyeball it and taste it as we go, and that's why we're all unicorn chefs together.
Yeah, and this is one of those reasons why I think when you end up cooking this, it's all about what your personal preferences are. And regarding this stir frying, do it in small batches. Don't ever kind of like do it all at once. It cooks better. There's less moisture in the oil, and you get better browning. The oyster sauce is one of those things where it doesn't pour very well, so that's like molasses. It's usually the last thing I end up pouring.
Yeah, it's really thick, very viscous.
There was a show I watched a couple of years ago where they explained how they make fish sauce. And I think if I remember correctly, it's much like where they basically get the dry fish and they just get all the salt from it.
I actually always figured that fish sauce was kind of a combination of soy sauce, and then they throw fish in and let it ferment.
Yeah, when I was looking yesterday at the store, it seemed like it was like sardines or something.
Yep.
I'm
Anchovy.
not a fan of sardines. Yeah, don't put sardines or anchovies on a pizza. I will hunt you down, much like pineapple.
I was about to say, where do you stand on pineapple?
I like it in certain respects.
You know what I think is funny is that both of these bottles, it's a little baby holding the sauce, and they're just very happy.
Yeah, much like this food should make you. I was warning Bryson before, is one of the reasons I was actually doing all this early is when I concentrate, I bite my lip. So like trying to open this bottle or whatever, I'm here like with amazing underbite. Oh, that chili sauce smells amazing.
So what's the first place you're gonna go when the pandemic is over?
I don't know. The thing is, during all this pandemic, we motorcycle. So we actually get out a lot, but it's more or less like your own personal space.
There was no place on the bucket list that y'all wanted to go?
Well, the other thing is our lease for our house ends next June. So our first thing, probably given the schedule, is probably move. And to that, we're probably going to move to the Seattle area. So finally out of DC after 30 years.
Aw, make me sad.
Yeah. Oh, and I forgot one other ingredient. I feel really bad about this. There's sugar. So if you have a glucose issue or you're trying to, kind of track your calories and stuff, you can use a sugar substitute. You could use honey, agave, monk fruit, couple different things. I do sugar, but it is what it is. And let me look at the menu one more time, just make sure. Where is the sugar? Yeah, 1 teaspoon.
So why Seattle?
Originally when I started thinking about places I wanted to move after working at the White House, Disney had offered to actually go up to Seattle, and the senior vice president kind of nixed that and sent me back down to Los Angeles. So I've always wanted to go up there. I've always wanted to live in the Pacific Northwest, and being that my current position is location independent, that's where I think I would find myself.
What do you do at Splunk?
So the job title is technology advocate. My boss says you're a professional storyteller. And unlike this particular conversation here, usually I'm pretty good about kind of basically talking about anything at any length. I've cornered Bryson many a time at a mixer or whatever, so he definitely knows I know how to talk. But generally, we talk about best practices for technology. Being that I've kind of worn the hat for everything, development, operations, security, I'm kind of now tapped with talking about DevSecOps. So I bring in a practitioner standpoint, but also an executive standpoint. But now it's just basically lots of webinars and virtual conferences.
I saw a thing today with Joe. You were talking about some of the memes that you've got going on for your talks.
Yeah. The thing is, I have a hook with putting pop culture references in all of my talks. My first keynote mentioned that Ghostbusters is the movie that keeps on giving.
Why is that?
It's just so eminently quotable. It's got good one-liners. It's got good mental imagery. And for a lot of people, at least I don't know if it's just the United States or globally, that there's a lot of touchstones, I guess you can have with it. The Stay Puft Marshmallow Man, Don't Cross the Stream.
Don't cross the stream.
What are we doing cooking wise right now, by the way?
Oh, sorry, I'm finishing up on the beef. I accidentally turned the heat down a little too much. So are you already browning your beef?
Yep. Well, I'm doing chicken, but yes.
Okay. Oh, your chicken beef, yeah. All right. So I finished making the sauce. So with that was usually like 2 parts of the fish sauce, 2 parts of the soy sauce, 2 parts of the garlic chili sauce, 2 parts oyster sauce. And then, as you mentioned about the sugar, that's usually about 1 part. So garlic, sugar, ginger, and jalapeños. That's the to taste thing. This is the most organized my kitchen counter's ever been when I've been cooking. It's ridiculous.
And we can't see it, so you're good either way.
Yeah, well, I have video here, so you'll get probably another image of it at some point. Didn't want to let it go to waste. This is why GoPros are purchased. So if you prep ahead of time, you usually get your Thai holy basil. So usually, like you would for pho or anything like that, pull the leaves off, drain them. I usually put them in a salad spinner. Since I did this like 3 hours ago, they were draining, but they're not. I have a wet floor, which reminds me I want to clean that up before I fall on my butt. But pretty much once that's been going, and provided you're also making rice, and here's a secret I ended up learning from YouTube videos and folks who are Asian cuisine aficionados, make your rice a day ahead of time. So I've been using jasmine rice. I made this last night, so we're close to the 24 hours. The cooking of the beef would maybe take about 20 to 25 minutes if you're using the recommended 3/4 of a pound. Also makes lots of noise. Now I actually have 2 woks here. I have one that I've been doing the beef in, and then I have a large one because when you end up combining like all the ingredients, you're going to need like a little bit more bulk. Since we got a little time to kill because we cut ahead of time, I'm letting the oil cool a little bit, but you would want to kind of reuse that oil in your mega wok as it has that like beefy flavor. Same would go for the chicken or anything else.
So what have you been advocating for this year? So you said you were doing DevSecOps. Like, what's the big takeaway?
Generally, there's nothing you can buy to make it happen. It's one of those cases where it's more about like kind of cultural change and organizational change management. With that is that anybody who's done DevOps is traditionally looking at just overlaying like your operations and development people, which is just the develop to release. Whereas when you start to throw in security on there, that's something that needs to be thought about at the start, through the process of development, to delivery, and then to operations. And people think it's going to be as easy as like DevOps was sold to them, and they figure, you know, we can just buy product X or product Y. And it's much more of a people and process thing rather than just a buy that you can have.
So we got a question that came in here. What's the difference between holy basil and regular basil?
Regular basil is an Italian sweet basil typically. It's not necessarily sweet, it's got a little bit more bitter. Thai holy basil will also have like a red stem. And as I mentioned, I think at the beginning has more of a ginger flavor to it. When my spouse was down here, when I was cutting stuff up, thought that they smelled cat pee. So that's definitely also a nose thing.
That might have been more like the oyster sauce or the fish sauce. That can have kind of like a kind of thing.
Well, they also don't like cilantro. I feel kind of bummed. I had this whole kitchen set up here with the GoPro. I had my iPhone tied in. I've got like Minicam going. It's like I was going to do this whole production and then of course go to webinar, but it's just like, nope.
You are not the first to attempt this. Actually, so I'll tell you, the first was Chris Krebs. Chris tried to go.
Oh, wow.
And it failed.
Yeah. Best laid plans.
The best laid plans constrained by our technical production.
Right. I think it would have worked in Zoom though, but oddly enough today I was recording something for a rubric, and it was about data and privacy and looking at stuff with TikTok, Strava, the recent Facebook Project Aria issues where, you know, they're going to do a Google Glass Mark II, and highlighted Zoom.
What do you think about that? I'm skeptical.
Oh, I think it's a disaster. The things I highlighted were the fact that Facebook got in trouble back in 2014 for running a, was it not an emotional distress, but basically kind of like a mood experiment without letting people know. And while whatever they did seemed legal, you know, when you do psychological experiments, you kind of want to let your participants know that they're part of it. So like Facebook said with Project Aria, the folks are going to go through training, the Facebook employees are going to go through training. They're going to wear like a special vest. And I don't know if they're like pinning a sandwich board on them saying like, hey, we have a new product. But, you know, as we go to security conferences, you know, we know that like when we go to the spaces, there's a defined no photo policy or something like that. You can't do that in the public. So like, how are they going to get around that? I always like eating my food when I'm cooking it.
I'm taste testing as I go and adjusting.
Well, it's a little difficult to kind of go and taste the sauce here because alone it's just nasty.
Yes, that is true.
But when it's added to food, it's so tasty.
Yep, that's what I got going on. So this is my sauce right now with my meat.
All right. Oh, you already started putting it in there. All right, then I guess I gotta get going.
Yeah.
So to go through the steps that Bryson skipped, or at least I wasn't good enough to talk about. So once you're done doing the beef, you want to take the oil that you had from making the beef, heat that up again, and then you're going to add your I forgot what the term is for the stuff that smells nice.
Fragrant?
Fragrance, yeah. Basically, there's a French term or whatever I think for this, but basically you heat the oil up, you get the garlic, the ginger, so it starts to kind of like cook and give you some flavor.
Yes, you want it to caramelize, because garlic, when it caramelizes, is not like garlic, but more of like a sweeter, more full body flavor. Yep.
Yeah. So I'm waiting for the oil to warm up in my other wok.
Oh, aromatics. Thank you,
aromatics. Jay. There you go. That's exactly what I was looking for.
See, this is
always help with the audience.
They're there to help us.
Thank you.
Yeah, for those of you who haven't
the other
seen
thing
that, was one of our previous unicorn chefs, Janine Frederick, who actually trained as a professional cook. So,
cool.
Real chef.
Yeah, I had dreams of doing something like that, like opening my own restaurant and bar, but I'll just settle for a food truck when I retire. But when we first moved here from the other side of Sterling, so I'm in Sterling, Virginia, we switched to these food kits like Hello Fresh and Blue Apron, and I'm not necessarily marketing them, but you know, it was better than going out and getting fast food or just kind of going back to the old favorites like chili and the Thai beef and basil. So now I have a huge dictionary sized folder here of stuff over the last year we've made. And that's actually kind of like really upped my cooking skill, like learning to let meats sear, which I was always flipping them and it never like got that nice little crust on there. Looking at different seasonings, how they kind of help with stuff. And that's kind of like, at least within our career, like the selection of like non-traditional people that we could bring in for staff and whatnot.
She says a food truck is way more fun than a professional kitchen.
I'm sure. I know what I'm going to do. And please don't anybody take my idea, but you can, you know, basically go and franchise it later. When I lived in LA the first time, there was a place called Chili My Soul over in Ventura. And every day they did about 9 to 10 different chilies. Vegetarian, different spice levels, different bases and stuff like that. And it was my favorite place to go. And this is when I was actually working for Stan Lee, the Marvel Stan Lee guy. And I loved it so much.
That story to the audience because not everybody knows that. Sorry, continue this
one.
But
okay.
Go back to the Marvel comic book story.
Yeah, I'll touch on that in a moment. Let's just finish the chili stuff. So I moved away from LA from this job and found out that this guy who ran the chili place was on like Food Network and had been profiled and whatnot. But he eventually ended up dying of a heart attack. But I managed to get a copy of his menu and some of his recipes are available and whatnot. But I figured, you know, one thing that's been missing in the DC food scene was a chili truck, because you can eat chili on its own. You can put it on a hot dog. You can do it Cincinnati style, which is where I'm from. So you have it on like spaghetti and rice. But generally, I'm just going to dump in my aromatics. Thank you for that term. You know, it was one of those things I always wanted to do if I didn't have to do my job. So back into that other story. So my second job out of college was working in DC for a nonprofit scientific society. And I saw this ad online. This is like one of the first online job ads, I think probably back in the late 1990s. And it said something like Stanley Media. I was like, well, that's interesting, but I you know, just didn't know much about it. So I submitted my resume and interviewed and whatnot. And this was actually after turning down a job writing for a magazine. And I went through this interview and supposedly ended up wowing the interviewer, who was the person who was leaving I was going to be replacing. And I didn't ask, like, what Stanley Media. It was a sysadmin job. Like, everybody starts out as a sysadmin. And when they called back and offered me the job, I had to clarify. I was like, so is this like Stan Lee, like Spider-Man, X-Man type kind of thing? And they're like, yes. So my nerd little heart jumped 5 feet out of my chest. Because I'm like, well, one, they're paying twice of what I'm making here in DC, which of course, you know, is DC is weird, but LA is even weirder. And second was like, I grew up on comic books. I'm sure a lot of people here are probably watching this grew up on comic books. So long story short, I ended up going out to work there for about a year. The company went under, which sucked, but lots of really great memories. And if you find me at a conference, I will tell plenty of Stan Lee stories because I've got plenty of them. So I will use that as a tease to go find me. But the funny thing was, when I ended up going to work at the White House a bunch of years later, when I was talking to the federal CIO, he's a big nerd, big Marvel, Star Wars, Disney nerd. And he was known as probably one of the geekier people, nerdier people in government at the time, or at least at that level. And he literally called me chief geek because like I out geeked him, which was a badge of honor I specifically wore. So it's weird, like you can go work at the White House and because you worked for like Stan Lee, like you somehow jumped a couple levels in people's minds.
I remember when you
I
first
did some really hacky shit there.
It caught me off guard. I was just like, wait, hold on. You like worked for the Stan Lee and you're like, oh yeah, blah, blah, blah. And of course you told me some of those stories and I'm just sitting there like,
Well, his former coworker at Marvel, one of his long-term friends, you know, rest in peace, Stan, Jim Salicrup, who now runs Paper Cuts Comics, did an amazing Stan impersonation. And while we're going out to a happy hour, we drove Jim in my car and stuff to the bar, and he starts doing his Stan impersonation, and we're kind of like, okay, he can do a dead-on Stan impersonation. What can we do to exploit this? Like, you know, could we call in, ask for a raise, you know, do all sorts of other stuff. We really did push it because we really liked our jobs and we didn't want to get fired. But Jim's been one of the greatest people I've met, at least in the industry in that respect, because he never kind of took himself too seriously. And I think that's much like what we do in our own careers. Like we're so hyper focused on a cert or getting this job or, you know, doing this role or finding this hack or whatever, and enjoy yourself. You enjoy the people you're around and whatnot. And I think that's the greatest thing out of this career is the people you meet and people you work with.
make an amazing Thai comfort dish and enjoy it with friends.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so I'm adding my sauce. I'm a little late to the game here, but you want to let that thicken a little bit when you're cooking it. Also add my jalapeños, which I'm going to make it spicy, and my spouse will probably just have to deal with it.
Yeah, see, I don't have a spouse. I have a teenage daughter, so I can't get away with this kind of stuff.
Well, I looked at all the other recipes you guys made, and I was like, I think this is the first really not US-ish type kind of meal that was being offered up. So I felt really weird being the whitest white person anybody knows. Thanks, 23andMe. And making, you know, something that's considered kind of an ethnic dish.
Janine made a paella, which is Spanish.
Yeah.
Last week was a sweet potato hash covered in with egg, which while hash might make you think of like American, turns out is kind of a luxury dish in Finland.
Cool.
I learned that because I had, that was the same day that I was doing the Hack the Capital conference, and my house is large enough that I was able to accommodate Hari Hursty coming over safely, and he's finished. And
yeah,
so,
I know. Yeah, I met Harley.
Yeah, so Hari was the one who explained this to me because I can still do some small hosting out on my deck where everybody's safe and outside, and he had a guest room at the other end of the house, and he was like, "Oh, this is what they serve in the finest Finnish like restaurants," and I was like, "Okay, that's cool." So I mean, apparently, like last week's Ellen McCullough recipe is a luxury Finnish dish. Let me think. What else have we done? Carl Cosmos, aka Silic from Cocktail Con. We did a cassoulet rapide, which is a French dish. So we've done some. I mean, yes. I think this is our first Asian dish.
Yeah, I think maybe that's where I want to go with this. But then again, like I said, I feel bad because we're talking about security and privacy, and I actually did 23andMe because I have very little background on my ethnic and health history, and whatever data set that they have not only kind of blew my mind that there are some parts of the globe that I didn't realize I had, you know, background in, but also like super whiter than white. Like it's scary. Like that's the reason why I sunburn, I think.
I can relate to that. So part of my family were Eastern European Jews, and that's a particularly that's a particular group that things get kind of muddled for multiple reasons. Part of it is, of course, coming through and immigrating to America back then. Names got changed, all of that. And then the other hard part, of course, is that with all of the events that were happening at the time, like that part of the family did not want to talk about the old country. And so it was kind of like the oral history stopped.
That's a little similar with us too. Like, I thought my mom's side of the family had actually emigrated from Germany to here a lot later than they did. I know definitely my dad's side of the family was much more recent, maybe late 1800s, early 1900s. At least, I was able to find some Ellis Island stuff when we went the first time. But I found out later when I ran into somebody who was doing some genealogy stuff that my mom's family kind of ran back a lot longer than I originally thought, like pre-Revolutionary War stuff in the Delaware Valley. So like they were fighting along with George Washington in the Revolutionary War. They were there before Ben Franklin. It's really enlightening when you kind of do some just surface level genealogy stuff, which now I feel like I need to do more about my family, but I don't know how to do it because I don't have a connection with either parts of my family right now. So where we are in the cooking process here, as Bryson and I were kind of like thickening up the sauce by cooking, at the time when it starts to thicken, start to add your beef, so it starts to pass through some of the flavor on it. Let that sit for about 3 to 4 minutes. Then as that starts to cook and maybe reduce a little bit, you can start adding your Thai basil. Then usually let the basil leaves wilt a little bit over the meat. That should start to impart a little bit more flavor. You can let it cook a little bit longer. And as I mentioned, this is definitely one of those meals that is good the second day, like not just good, but like knock your socks out awful. Oh, it's not awesome, not awful, sorry. Yeah, so this is pretty much kind of how the meal goes. If you've had rice that has been made prior, like this, I've used a rice cooker. I highly recommend a rice cooker if you have one. It's changed my life. We're talking about like those the food boxes before where they do it in the pot. It just doesn't seem to kind of come out the same way. So I'm just not a big fan of the pot method, but some people may want to do that or not. And if you feel the sauce is a little too thick for you, can always add a little bit of other liquid to it if you want to. Oh, I just realized I left out the broth.
Oh, yeah, sorry, I already added that in. I'm all ready to go.
All right. Hold on.
So the only thing I did different to add to the recipe is I threw in a little bit of lemongrass.
That would do it as well. That's something you can do to maybe substitute instead of the ginger.
And I have been to Thailand, and some of my favorite memories of Thailand are in Bangkok, which is literally as loud and as noisy and as touristy as you can imagine from any movie you've ever seen it in. It's so cool. When it turns evening, all of these food vendors come out of nowhere, and they just pull up. It's not like a food truck, it's like a cart. And then there's just like buckets of food and then rice on the side. And you just kind of like point to what you want, and they just give you a plate. They have lawn furniture that you're in the street, like you're not like on the side, like the streets just shut down, and everybody just starts like communally eating together. And the flavor I've got with this sauce reminds me of that. So whatever mix says, this is authentic Thai based on me eating in Bangkok for several weeks in lawn furniture on the street.
That's cool. Yeah, no, I could see the lemongrass. You could substitute definitely the lemongrass for the ginger. I just find it, I like the sharpness of ginger over lemongrass. I think lemongrass is much more mild. So, and for those who tuned in, and I was really bad about not mentioning the broth, traditionally, or at least the recipe I was basing my bastardization off of, uses chicken broth. which obviously with Bryson, with him using chicken, definitely works a lot better. I like beef, so I will substitute beef broth for chicken broth or do a halvesies on it. So I will do like half beef broth, half chicken broth, or do chicken broth substitute with some concentrated bouillon. I use better than bouillon, which is like super, super high. You don't have to add liquid to it, so you can just kind of like give it a little bit more beef kick.
Hey, Amelie.
Yeah. Nice. There you go.
that particular bouillon is my like go-to. That's like one of my chef secrets for it. If I have the time, I will render my own broth from, you know, different things, and I've showed some of that on the show before. But
Right.
that is my go-to on the grocery aisle, and it is the best substitute I have found.
The longest meal I've ever cooked, short of a holiday Thanksgiving meal, which I had like a turkey brining and beer, like Belgian beer and stuff for like a week. And it was cold out, so, you know, food safety and stuff, was making pho. That seemed to be like a 2 or 3 day process. If you're doing the traditional like bone broth and all the other stuff that was involved with that, it just seemed to take forever. But it was definitely worth it on the result out of it.
Yeah, no, when the pandemic first started, I did both pho and ramen from scratch. My
Right.
pho is not
What
usually.
else is there to do?
Well, exactly. That's why I started the show, because I was just like, let's just do this. Like, I'm cooking anyway, and I get to see friends. My ramen is a 3-day process. Pho, I can make pho in like 16 to 24 hours of effort.
Right. Well, I think that the challenge is and this may vary depending on when you tune in around the country and whatnot. Like, I think metro areas are benefiting from the fact that you have Asian and Latino markets where you have a variety of ingredients you can kind of select and pick from. And I really enjoy that around DC. As I mentioned before, like, we're potentially moving to outside of Seattle. I know that's a large Asian population out there, so I'm like looking forward to finding a lot more cool stuff out in the stores. I'm still not a fan of sushi though.
So how close are you on your food?
It's almost ready, really. I'm just kind of determining how much more basil I want to add just to kind of give it some more greenery. But I literally would just plate it with some rice and ready to go.
All right, well, let me know when you're there.
Fortunately, my rice is cold, so I need to figure out how to warm that up.
Okay.
I'll do the lazy American way, which is find a spoon, microwave.
Hey, as long as you keep it covered, you get the moisture in.
Yep.
I find me cooking is not about purity, right? Cooking is about, first of all, it's what we need to survive. Like, that's obvious. But my point being is that, like, we're all workaholics. We're all like trying to get by each day. Like, you know, life is kicking us in the metaphorical balls all the time. And so any shortcut we can find, any substitute we can find, anything that we can do that puts something that is decent on the plate is all that matters.
Sorry, camera.
So my point being in my little brief rant there is I'm not judging you microwaving rice.
Huh. Yeah, the funny thing is like you mentioned about like enjoying food and whatnot, and we decided to try to do a diet recently as I go and pull off random pieces of rice that fell on the counter. So that's what I do. Well, the fact is like we tried to do some of these fad diets before. Me and my spouse had some desire to kind of do some stuff, and we just recently tried to do keto.
Ugh,
and that is so strict, and I can't do it. I lost all joy of not only cooking but also eating. Like, I got to where we're making the recipe and I'm just like, I don't want to make it. Collard greens made me go to the bathroom. I was going to say shit my pants, but essentially go to the
Well,
bathroom in a very uncomfortable
You did
fashion.
anyway.
Yeah. So yeah, this is my kind of like F you to keto. Like you could make this keto if you wanted to, but this is my favorite dish to make, and this is me officially breaking my diet essentially.
So you're married. She loves you no matter what you look like, right? And
Yeah.
in the meantime, enjoy what you get to eat and what you're doing every day.
Yeah, and that's exactly, I think, you know, die happy. All right.
I'm not going to
So
completely
GoPro
advocate for this, but the Russians, as depressed as they are culturally, have a very fatalistic perspective, which I think we can turn on its head in this regard for a little bit of a hedonism. And their view is, if you don't smoke and drink, you die healthy. At the end of the day, it's what happens to all of us. And you know, eating some rice and this, I don't think is going to take that many seconds off of that end. And it's a great meal.
Yeah. Well, I know you mentioned Mick was judging me, so
He was
Mick, get ready to judge me.
He was prejudging. He was prejudging.
Oh,
he was
prejudging.
just kind of like, what's going to happen here?
Well, as long as it's edible, and I will fake it till I make it at this point, hoping that it does taste good. Because that is the one thing I have not demonstrated, which is the fact that as you're cooking, you should be tasting as you're going.
Yep.
It's just the fact is I've done this so often that I kind of trust my measurements.
So first of all, Mick has not come on a show yet, so that's where I'm going to put him in ranking. And two, having spent a substantial amount of time in Thailand, as I shared earlier, he can go jump in a lake because this is fantastic. And I know he would not give you any guff if he actually tasted this himself, because this is a fantastic meal.
Thank you. I just know that when I actually finally made it for somebody outside my household, it was for a potluck at DC3. It was probably a couple months before I left, and I made probably a 4X recipe of it, and I didn't go home with anything. And this was with everybody else bringing their big game, like their casseroles, their cookies, and stuff like that. Like I went home with a clean hot plate.
I believe it. I am ready to eat. This is amazing. I'm going to start plating.
Oh, I already just plated mine. Sorry.
Oh, that's all right. I will catch up in a second. We will take our picture of our dinners together, and then we get to go eat.
Yes. I was told that you don't do this with chopsticks. Because, I don't know.
All right, let's get it set up. Hold on. You got to get your face in it. Yep, there we go. Ready? And any parting words for?
I'm getting a forkful first. Oh man, that was so worth the effort. So parting words. Since we didn't go too much on career stuff and whatnot, one thing from my entire career, like you mentioning, like doing Stanley, White House, and all this other junk, it's good to have a plan, but kind of let the world also influence you. Take advantage of the chances you get. They make conversations much more lively around a bar, but also you may end up learning stuff you may not typically have thought that you were going to learn because, you know, experiences along the way. Like I didn't think I would actually ever find the Thai basil beef as my dish, but it's my dish. Cheers.
And donate to the Washington Area Bicyclist Association. Share your picks, #Unicorn Chef. We look forward to seeing you next week. Amelie, thank you so much.
Take care, everybody. Bike safely.